right up here. Now, Gibeah was not Canaanites. They were Israelites. So they get to Gibeah late in the evening, and they come into the town square, and they're staying there. Nobody invites them in. But about that time, this older gentleman comes in and invites them into his home. So they go to eat at his home, and no sooner do they get settled in for the night than there's a bang on the door. And the men of Gibeon, or some of the men of Gibeon, have gathered together, and what do they say? Bring this man out that we may know him carnally. And the host objects to this. What they end up doing is they end up taking this man's concubine and pushing her outside. And these men take her and abuse her all night long. And in the morning, she dies at the threshold of the house. When the Levite who lives in Ephraim gets up in the morning, he finds his concubine dead. He loads her on his animal. He takes her back home. And then he does something that was unheard of. He dismembers her, sends 12 body parts to the different tribes. Everybody, when they see this, they're shocked at this. They gather together and they say, what does this mean? What happened? And the man explains the wickedness of the men of Gibeon. And what do all the Israelites that have gathered together vow to do? We will go to war and we will destroy them. So the first thing that they do is they go down and they demand from the Gibeonites that they turn over the ones who were guilty. That's reasonable. What did the Gibeonites say? No. Not only do the Gibeonites refuse, what else? All the tribe of Benjamin have come together to defend the Gibeonites in this. So now you have all the tribes of Israel except the Benjamites at odds with the Benjamites. And the Benjamites are ready to fight rather than turn over the guilty perpetrators to the rest of Israel. So that's where we're at right now. Any comments or questions before we get into the new material? Civil war is about to break out among God's people over a violent crime that was taking place by God's people. So, I want you to notice in verse 15, how many Benjamites do we have here? 26,000 who drew the sword, and how many, that's not including the people of the city of Gibeah, how many soldiers do we have in the Gibeonites? 700. All right, so we've got 26,700 total Benjamites. And as it describes these were some bad dudes. You look at verse 16, it says there were 700 select men who were left-handed. Everyone could sling a stone at a hair's breadth and not miss. I'm not exactly sure what a hair's breadth is. I'm assuming that that's talking about like a human hair, the width of a human hair. That's probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but you get the idea. These guys were deadly accurate with these slings. By the way, I think that we, because slingshots are something that some of us older generation played with as kids, we think of slings as kind of being toys. But in the ancient world, slings were significant weapons. The Romans, all the way up into the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries, the Romans used slings and used lead balls, and they said they could sling one entirely through a person. In other words, it was ancient bullets is what it was. And so you think of David, and he wasn't playing with a toy that he had when he killed Goliath. He was using an actual weapon. The Benjamites, left-handed men, deadly accurate with this. So the Benjamites are a serious threat here, even though they're greatly outnumbered. Because the children of Israel, how many of the children of Israel do we have? Verse 17. 400,000 who drew the sword, and these were men of war as well. So we have all of the best fighters from both sides gathered together. And I want you to notice, we set this up last time, and I won't go through setting it all up again. But at this point, in your mind, who are the bad guys? The Benjamites, that's right. They're defending the guilty, the wicked. Who are the good guys? You would think the other tribes who are trying to get what's just here and right and punish these evildoers. That makes sense. And notice what the good guys do here. Verse 18, the children of Israel arise and they go where? To the house of God. And what do they ask at the house of God? Who shall go first? Yeah, who shall go first on this? So do you think it's good that they're going to God and asking about this? Inquiring. I think that's a good thing. But you know what's ironic about this? This sounds very similar to what we read in chapter 1 when they were talking about conquering the land of Canaan. And they said, which tribe should go up first? And God said, Judah shall go up first. Now that's when they were fighting the Canaanites. Now who are they fighting? Their own brethren. Who shall go up first? And who does the Lord answer? Verse 18. Judah shall go up first. All right, so very reminiscent here of what we see. So the children of Israel rise up in the morning and they encamp against Gibeah. And the men of Israel went out to battle against the Benjamites. And the men of Israel put themselves in battle array to fight against Gibeah. But verse 21, what does verse 21 say, Colby?
Then the children of Benjamin came out of Gibeah, and on that day cut down to the ground 22,000 men of the Israelites.
Is that what you expected to happen? The good guys, we've got clear bad guys, no doubt. We've got people that appear to be good guys. They go to the Lord, ask, who should we send out? Judah should be sent out. They send out Judah, and 22,000 Israelites are cut down. Can you fathom 22,000 people being killed in one day here? Of the good guys. What is going on? And that is very disturbing. You notice that it says, verse 23, the children of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until evening and asked counsel of the Lord, saying, shall I again draw near for battle against the children of my brother Benjamin? And the Lord says what? Go up. All right. Now, when the Lord says go up to battle, what are you expecting to happen?
To win.
You're expecting to win. So they draw up the second day to go to battle against the Benjamites. Verse 25.
And Benjamin went out against them from Gibeah on the second day and cut down to the ground 18,000 more of the children of Israel. All these drew the sword.
All right, so if you were some of the Israelites that gathered together and said, we cannot tolerate this kind of wickedness in our nation, we will not stand for this, turn over the guilty party that they may be punished, and if you won't turn over the guilty party, then we will come in and we will destroy you. Sound like righteous indignation? Now, what are you thinking now with this righteous indignation that you have, and you've gone to fight against Gibeah twice, have been greatly outnumbered, and you've been decisively beat both times, suffered huge losses both times. What are you thinking? Yeah. But we asked God, do you want us to go up again? What did God say? Go up. Is God with us? Apparently not. So they're starting to think now. They're starting to question. Is that good that they're questioning? See, we had in our mind that these must be the good guys. But Sherry spoiled it for us last time when she said, there are no good guys in this story. There are no good guys in this story. Not at this point. Yes, they were upset about something. Yes, they had righteous indignation about this. But what God wanted them to see is, I can't be with you either. You've got your own wickedness. And that's right. I'm not your king. And so this time, verse 26, the children of Israel go up, they come to the house of the Lord, they wept, they sat there before the Lord and fasted that day until evening. They offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. And the children of Israel inquired of the Lord. The Ark of the Covenant of God was there in those days. And I want you to notice verse 28, because this is a time reference, a surprising time reference. What does verse 28 say?
And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, stood before it in those days, saying, shall I yet again go out to battle against the children of my brother Benjamin, or shall I cease? And the Lord said, go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into your hand.
Okay, so we've got several things here we need to unpack. The first thing is the time reference. Is this late in the days of the judges or early in the days of the judges? Very early. Very early. Do you remember that the book of Judges starts off that all the days of Joshua, that generation was faithful. But the next generation, they did not know the Lord. This would have had to have been that next generation. Do you see that we end with one of the darkest stories in the period of the book of Judges? And actually, this didn't happen at the end. It happened very early in the days of Judges. very quickly after they departed from knowing the works of the Lord. How long does it take a society, a culture, to go from being faithful to the Lord to being not? One generation. It takes one generation. That's exactly right. One generation. And that's what we're seeing right here. One generation later, that it is this bad. And yeah.
With Eliezer, would he been like generation Joshua?
Yes, I believe that's right. So if I remember correctly, Eliezer continues on with Joshua and probably outlives Joshua, because Joshua would have been one of the older, Joshua and Caleb, the very oldest of that next generation. So I think Eliezer would have continued on. Eliezer dies, Phinehas takes over, and Phinehas was a godly man. We have good stories about Phinehas, and but by this point, the nation's not following his lead on that. So that's the first thing is we're surprised by is how early this is taking place. Now they go to the Lord again. This time there's fasting involved here along with weeping and inquiring of the Lord and sacrifices that are offered. And the Lord says this time, what's different about what he says this time? I will deliver you. So he told them to go the last two times, but he didn't say he was going to deliver them. Now they seem to realize we must need to repent too, and we seem to see that repentance. And God says, okay, now I'll be with you and deal with the Gibeonites.
So I was about to ask that question. Bob Waldron in his book kind of made it seem like, I think his words were, the first time they asked, their thinking might not have been quite as God-centered as what it should have been. Do you think that you see a change in attitude from the first time they asked to the third time they ask? Do you see that, or?
I think so. I think, and again, we just have these indications. Like the second time they ask, they're weeping about this, and they inquire of the Lord. The third time they ask, we see weeping, fasting, peace offerings, burnt offerings, and you see the Ark of the Covenant is involved here. Phinehas. I don't know how they were asking before. God did respond. God did answer before, but it seems to me it's much more involved by the third time. There does seem to be a change in spirit and attitude about this, and I think that the natural process would be, wow, we thought we were the good guys, but God is obviously not with us. What's wrong here? And that was a good question to ask. Well, what's wrong is you're not righteous, and so here you're all upset about this, but you're not righteous. And I think that's a great lesson for us. Y'all may remember, I think it's been a number of years since I've done this here. I did a lesson called Bible Belt Religion. And in the South, and I kind of based it on a lot of country songs, how you kind of see that theme in country songs, that we're God-fearing Southerners here. And then the whole song's about fornicating and drinking and all of this, but we're God-fearing Southerners here. And how does God do that? I think that kind of what the rest of the nation was saying is, we're God-fearing people. We're not going to put up with this type of ungodliness here in our country. And God says, no, you're not God-fearing. You're not God-fearing. Yes?
I have another question. I don't know if it can be answered for sure, but, Benjamin is so heavily outnumbered. Are we to assume that God did pronounce judgment on Israel and work through Benjamin, even though they were wicked too, but he did work through them to bring judgment upon Israel? Now he's about to turn the tables right back.
I think that's exactly right. Would that be inconsistent with what we see in other places in the Scripture? All right. Can you name me an example of that? Do you have one in mind? I know I'm putting you on the spot there. What about Babylon? Do you remember that the question that Haggai, right? That had about Babylon is, his first question was, God, you see how much wickedness here? Are you not going to do something? And God says, I am going to do something. I'm bringing the Chaldeans against the Chaldeans. Well, they're horrible. They're worse than we are. And God says, yep, but I'm going to punish with them, and then I'll punish them. And I think that that's what's happening here. We look at it and we say, well, the Benjamites were worse than the rest of Israel. Maybe so. but God's going to use them to punish the rest of Israel, and then He's going to turn around and use Israel to punish the Benjamites. Now, that's my understanding of this. But this is a tragedy all the way around. It really is. It's a tragedy all the way around. When we look at the final numbers here in just a second, it's astounding what takes place, how tragic this would have been for the nation. Any other thoughts before we get into verse 29? Okay, so in verse 29, Israel is going to go back out. They have the Lord's promise now that He will deliver the Benjamites into their hands. So they go out and they change their battle plan a little bit. We've seen this type of battle plan before. As a matter of fact, last time we saw Israel so confident they were going to take a place and they were defeated was where? Ai. Yeah. And so when they go back to take Ai, do you remember the battle plan that they had? The men of Ai had come out and driven them back, but only killed, I think it was like 36 of them. Yes, they set an ambush. Well, same battle strategy here. The Israelites set an ambush behind the city. They go to attack Gibeon again, and the Gibeonites come out and begin to strike down and kill some of the people as at other times. Verse 31. And at this, once they see they're being beaten a little bit, they make a conscious effort to withdraw back. So what did the Gibeonites think? That's right. So they chase after them, and they lure them away from the city far enough, and then the ambush comes in and takes the city. And so the ambush, now the city's left defenseless because the Gibeonites have come out, or the Benjamites have come out pursuing the Israelites. And now the Israelites that were laying in ambush sweep into the city and set the city on fire. And when the Benjamites turn around and look behind them, what do they see? Their city burning. That was also the signal now for the Israelites that were pretending to flee to turn around and pursue. And this causes chaos among the Benjamites, and the Benjamites scatter and they run everywhere, and the Israelites go and strike them down. Now, how much mercy is extended at this point in the battle? None. And so we're going to kill every last one of them if we can. And so that's what they're trying to do. So they continue to chase them down. I'm trying to look at verse 35. Colby, do you mind reading verse 35?
The Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel, and the children of Israel destroyed that day 25,100 Benjamites. All these drew the sword.
How many Benjamites did we start off with? 26,700 Gibeonites. How many just died now? 25,100. And we've probably lost some others in the first battles that are not recorded there. Wow. And not only that, but then what do the Israelites do to the city of Gibeon and other cities of Benjamin? They struck everybody in there, including the animals, with the edge of the sword, men, women, and children. Okay, so we have a head count of soldiers that died. How many other Israelites died that we don't have a count of? Probably a lot. Do you see what's taking place here? Let me give you some figures here. And I think I dropped a hint about this earlier. We have at least 25,000 Benjamites who died. We have over 40,000 Israelites who died. We've got a head count of dead soldiers that is 65,000. 65,000. In the Korean War, we lost 36,500 soldiers. U.S. did. In the Vietnam War, we lost 58,000 soldiers. For a small nation like Israel, losing 65,000 fighting men is catastrophic. Not to mention the women and children that have been killed in this. When people do what's right in their own eyes and they forget about God, remember what God said about His statutes? They're for our good always. And they're reaping the consequences of turning their back on God here. And they're destroying themselves in that. Now, as we just talked about, I think God is instrumental in in bringing this judgment upon them. But you see how this is going. This is terrible. This is probably one of the worst defeats that Israel has outside the Assyrian invasion and the Babylonian captivity that we have anywhere in the Bible. And so it would would not be unlikely at all that we have close to 80,000 die in this civil war, if not more. And it's incredibly devastating to this nation. Now, there are some that survive. Look at verse 47 and 48, please.
But 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and they stayed at the rock of Rimmon for 4 months. And the men of Israel turned back against the children of Benjamin and struck them down with the edge of the sword from every city, men and beasts, all who were found. They also set fire to all the cities that they came to.
So out of the tribe of Benjamin now, we're down to 600 men. Everybody else in the tribe of Benjamin has been destroyed, except 600. And they would have killed them too, except that they got away and fled. But now, after these got away, the Israelites got to thinking about this. This is terrible, because how many tribes have there always been? 12. And I mean, a lot was based upon the 12 tribes of Israel. And now there's not going to be 12 anymore. And they begin to think about this, and they begin to be sorrowful about this. And but they had made this promise. They had made this promise, and this is really interesting. So verse 1 of chapter 21, the men of Israel had sworn an oath at Mizpah, saying, none of us shall give his daughter to Benjamin as wife. We will not marry with that tribe. Why is that interesting? Why are they in this mess to begin with?
Because everyone did what was right in their own life.
Can you name something specifically that has to do with, I'm asking you to read my mind here. Who did God tell them to make an oath not to marry? The Canaanites. Did they do that? They did marry the Canaanites. And now look, in their righteous indignation, we will not marry the Benjamites. They make this oath. Well, I'll tell you, that zeal and that enthusiasm for saying, we won't be tied to that type of sin, should have been there from the beginning with the Canaanites. And if it would have been there from the beginning with the Canaanites, they wouldn't be in this situation where they're in now. But now they say this about their brethren, the Benjamites, which I understand. But that rash vow that they made there causes a predicament now. Because they wiped out all the Benjamite women. There's 600 Benjamite men, and now they're regretting the fact that they're just, in essence, eliminated one tribe of the 12. And so they start thinking about, well, we can't, there's still a chance, maybe, but we can't give any of our wives to them so that they can continue to repopulate. What are we going to do? And so they start thinking, and they thought, you know what? We said something else too. We said that if any city didn't send people to Mizpah to fight against them, that we would destroy that city. Is there any cities that didn't send anybody? And they found one. Who was it?
Jabesh Gilead.
Jabesh Gilead, which is going to be a crossover here. Jabesh Gilead. So here's what they decide to do. They decide that what they're going to do is they are going to go and destroy the city of Jabesh Gilead because they didn't show up. That's what. Isn't it interesting here how firm they are on their vows that they make? They swore that if anybody didn't come, they were going to destroy that city. They're going to keep that. They swore that they were not going to give any of their wives to the Benjamites, and they feel very obligated to keep that now. But there were apparently a lot of other things that they didn't feel as convicted about that they should have. So it's just interesting to see how that works. And so here's what they do. They go in, the congregation sends out 12,000 of their most valiant men, verse 10, and they commanded them, saying, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, including the women and children. And this is the thing you shall do. You shall utterly destroy every male and every woman who has known a man intimately. So they do that. But they find 400 young virgins who had not known a man intimately. And so what do they do with them? They offer them to the Benjamites as wives. Now, we can't give you our daughters as a wife, but these people we just destroyed because they didn't show up to fight against you, you can have their virgin daughters. And so they all, okay, what's the problem here? Math people. How many men we got of Benjamin? 600. How many wives do we have for them? That means there's 200 guys that don't have wives. And at this point, when you've destroyed nearly all of the tribe, you really want every one of them to be able to have a wife to reproduce. So what are we going to do here? And the story just gets better, doesn't it? This whole story is just a train wreck. And again, we'll see why at the very end. So they begin to think about this, and they announce peace to the Benjamites. Verse 14, the Benjamites come back. They give them the women that they had saved alive from Jabesh Gilead. But verse 15 says the people grieve for Benjamin because the Lord had made void a tribe in Israel. So they're still upset about this. So now the elders of the congregation come up with an idea. Would you mind reading starting in verse 16 and read through verse 22?
Then the elders of the congregation said, "What shall we do for wives for those who remain, since the women of Benjamin have been destroyed?" And they said, "There must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that a tribe may not be destroyed from Israel. However, we cannot give them wives from our daughters, for the children of Israel have sworn an oath, saying, 'Cursed be the one who gives a wife to Benjamin.' Then they said, 'In fact, there is a yearly feast of the Lord in Shiloh, which is north of Bethel on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem and south of Lebanon. Therefore they instructed the children of Israel, saying, Go lie in wait in the vineyards, and watch. And just when the daughters of Shiloh come out to perform their dances, then come out from the vineyards, and every man catch a wife for himself from the daughters of Shiloh, then go to the land of Benjamin. Then it shall be, when their fathers or their brothers come to us to complain, then we will say to them, Be kind to them for our sakes, because we did not take a wife for any of them in the war. For it is not as though you have given the women to them at this time, making yourselves guilty of your oath."
Ah, what a clever solution. And just go kidnap some of the young daughters when they are in their parade. And we'll cover for you in that. What was the penalty for kidnapping according to the law of Moses? Death. But we'll cover for you because we've sworn an oath. Did God expect them to keep their oaths? Yes. But what is happening here? I mean, we've got this righteous indignation because of the wickedness of the Benjamites. We've got this real conviction about keeping oaths, and we look at that and say, well, that's... And then we're willing to suggest they go kidnap innocent women here, that we wipe out a whole city and steal their virgin daughters to get... What is going on? Well, sure enough, the children of Benjamin did so. And they took enough wives for the number of those from those who danced. They caught them, and they went and returned to their inheritance, and they rebuilt the city and dwelt there. So what we have here is we have a picture of how close the tribe of Benjamin got to extinction and what the remedy was so that they were brought back. And it's a train wreck, like I said. It's a disaster. Now, what's interesting, this would have been at the beginning of the period of the Judges. How long did the period of the Judges last? 430 years, something like that. And so by the time we get to the end of the Judges, who's the first king of the United Kingdom? And what tribe was he from? Benjamin. And so the reason that we have Saul is because they went and took wives from these other cities. That's the only way that tribe survived there. But here's the kicker. Here's the conclusion of this whole thing. Verse 25. In those days, there was no king in Israel, Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So the writer of the book of Judges saves some of the most atrocious stories for at the very end. And then his last parting sentence is, how we got in this mess was because we did what we thought was right in our own eyes rather than listening to God and letting him rule over us. That's how we're in this predicament. And that is the point. That is the point. But as we read through here, the book of it's a little bit disconcerting because most of us, when we learn about the judges, we learn about Deborah, we learn about Samson, we learn about some of these heroes, and we think, oh, this was a time when God was rescuing people with these heroes of the faith. Well, yes. Why was he having to rescue? Because it's one of the darkest times in his people's history. Because they did what was right in their own eyes. Do you see, as we cover through this, do you see the similarities in even our culture today? Maybe even in ourselves today. In other words, this is timeless lessons here. Because man continues from Eve's time until today, we continue to try to do what's right in our own eyes, rather than let God reign over us. And what the book of Judges is showing us is, do you understand where that leads? Do you understand what happens when we do that? And it's always the same. It's always a train wreck to one degree or another. And so, valuable lesson in the book of Judges. I don't like the book of Judges very much because of these stories. I mean, I like some of the stories, great. But some of them are just gut-wrenching. But it's important to study that because we learn from that. We learn from that because we see that in ourselves. We can see it in the culture and society that we live in. You got anything you want to add to that? Anybody?
It seems like God, he allows them, even though he sends a deliverer, and I may be misspeaking here, but it seems like he's allowing them to have their free will here to self-destruct, basically. I mean, I look at the story about Jabesh Gilead. I mean, that is terrible that they would go and kill really innocent people that didn't have anything to do with the situation, just to try to make their situation, their problem better.
That's right.
And it's just, I don't have anything to add other than what you said. I mean,
All right. Well, I don't want to end a quarter like that. I do want that lesson to soak in for us. We need to be sobered by that. But the very next book takes place during the days of the judges and yet is a different tone altogether. It's a bright spot. It is a ray of light, not just for the time during the judges, but also in the future. And so the book of Judges is not a favorite of mine because of the darkness of it. The book of Ruth is a favorite of mine because of the light of it. And just because it was a time when everybody was doing what was right in their own eyes, there were people that we see godly influences in. And we see that God has not forgotten his plan. And I think that's if you want to talk about an absolute disaster, God was allowing them to use their free will to self-destruct, but at the same time, he still preserved them for the purpose of bringing about his promise. And I think the book of Ruth is a link to that. Let me caution you about something about the book of Ruth. When I first started to read and study the Bible, got to the book of Ruth, it's a really charming story about loyalty and friendship and devotion and kindness and those type of things. And people like to preach on that and teach on that. And it's a wonderful book about those things. But that's not the main point of it. And if someone were to ask me early in my Bible study, what's the point of the book of Ruth? I would say, well, to tell us that we should be loyal and kind and that loyalty pays off and that God rewards loyalty. That may be a secondary lesson from the book. It is a secondary lesson of the book. But that's not the primary lesson. The primary lesson ties it into the whole theme of the Bible of what God's trying to accomplish in man's salvation. We'll see that, but we have to save it for the very end. So let's get into chapter 1 in the time that we have here. Came to pass in the days of judge when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. Why would you think there's a famine? Didn't God promise that his people wouldn't endure famines and things like that? Yeah, so after looking at the days of the judges, are we surprised that there's a severe famine in the land? No. And this story also takes place starting in Bethlehem. So Bethlehem has come up now in the last 3 stories in one way. And Bethlehem was a small village. By the way, does anybody know what the name Bethlehem means? House of bread. And what's going on in Bethlehem right now? There's no bread in the house of bread. And so we have a man here, Elimelech, and his wife Naomi, and they had 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and they were Ephraimites of Bethlehem, of Judah, and they went to the country of Moab to remain there. So they're having to leave the land of milk and honey because there's no bread in the house of bread, and they have to come over and dwell in the Moabite country in order to survive. That's what's taking place among God's people right now. So there in Moab, their 2 sons end up marrying who? Moabite women. Do you know what happens when when young people grow up and get where they're at the age where they want to marry? You know who they marry? They marry people they're around. So I'll just plug in another little facet here to think about. Parents, if you're concerned about who your children marry, then what are you going to need to try to do? You're going to have to try to, as much as it's in your sphere of influence, to make sure they're in contact with people that you would want them to marry, because they're going to marry someone that they're near. Well, that's what happens here. Now, that's not the main point of this. It's just, well, how do you have Israelite men marrying Moabite women here? Well, because that's who they were around. That's who they were around. And so I don't want to dwell on this too much. We have a lot of opportunities in Northwest Alabama for our young people to be around other godly young people. Compared to the rest of the world, lots and lots of opportunities. Compared to the rest of the United States, I think about the Christians that I know in the Czech Republic, and they may not know anyone of the opposite sex that's around their age that's a faithful Christian anywhere in their country. And yet some of them have made concerted efforts, and you know it was a concerted effort, to find someone, even if it was from another country, that was a godly person that could be their spouse. If they can make that type of effort to make sure that their children, or to make sure that they find someone who is godly, even if they have to go out of the country to do so, we certainly should be able to, if we put forth the effort. But sometimes we take that for granted. We don't think about that. So that's all free. All right. Coming back to our lesson here now. So they married Moabites, but while they're in the land of Moab, how long were they there? They were there 10 years. And what happens during that 10-year period to the family? Tragedy strikes. What happens? Naomi's husband dies. Well, that's sad, but who's to take care of a widow? Their sons. All right, so then what happens? Both of her sons die. Who's to take care of them now? No, you have 3 widows now. You have Naomi, and you have her 2 daughter-in-laws, Moabites. They're living in their home country. She's not. All 3 are widows. All 3 are in desperate situations. So I'm going to summarize a lot of chapter 1 here so that we can get through this. But basically, what she finds out is okay, things are a little bit better back home. There's bread in the house of bread again. And so I'm going to return back to my hometown where some of my family lives, and hopefully I can scrape together a living there since I don't have any family here. But you 2 girls do have family here, and so I want you to go back to your father's homes, and God bless you. Hope things go well with you. And what happens? Both of them object at first and say, no, we will stay with you. And she says, listen, you're young women. You could find a husband. I'm not going to be able to give you another husband. Go find husbands, have families, and just let me go back home. And so Orpah, one of them, says, that makes sense. Wish you well. And she went back. No, that's logical. But what does Ruth do? Ruth does what's not normal, what's illogical here. And so Ruth clings to her, verse 14, and Ruth says to her in verse 16, would you read verse 16 and 17, please?
But Ruth said, entreat me not to leave you, or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me.
Wow, unexpected loyalty here in this. And she's willing to leave her country now and go back with Naomi to Israel. And so when Naomi sees that she's determined to go, she stops speaking to her, and the two of them go back to Bethlehem. And they get back to Bethlehem about the time of the barley harvest. And when they get back, everybody's excited to see Naomi. It's been over 10 years since they've seen her, and they're excited about it. And they're, oh, Naomi, you're home. And she said, don't call me Naomi anymore. What does Naomi mean? Pleasant. My life has been anything but pleasant. Don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara, which means what? That describes my life. It's been bitter. It's been bitter. This is such an interesting moment because you know the rest of the story probably as we're going through here. And this moment to Naomi, from her perception, is my life is bitter. There's no hope for me. I'm a widow. I don't have a husband. My life is nothing but bitterness. But you, because you know the story, can peek through the curtain and see what's coming. And the reality is her life is not really bitter. It may be to her at this moment, but it's not about to be bitter. Isn't that interesting? I love when the Bible gives us glimpses to how we can perceive something in life, and yet the reality is quite different. And so I try to remember that when there's times where I say, don't call me Lonnie anymore, call me miserable, because I'm just miserable. And to remember, yeah, that's my perception right now. That doesn't mean that's really the way my life is and that it's going to turn out, but that characterizes my whole life. Because when we think of Naomi, we don't think of her life as being bitter and miserable. We think about, oh, wow, the Lord really did something through her. What a blessing the Lord placed her in and using her the way that he did. Any thoughts through chapter 1? You got anything?
Nope.
By the way, verse 16 and 17, Amanda put on my groom's cake, and she's been true to that. She's lodged where I've lodged and all of that stuff, and so that is beautiful, beautiful words there. It wasn't originally from a wife to her husband. It was from an unexpected source of a widowed daughter-in-law to her widowed mother-in-law, and we'll see how that turns out. Any final thoughts?
I know it was bad and it was difficult, but I still, for me, I have a little bit of a problem that they leave and go into Moab, foreign country. They leave their people where they were supposed to belong and stay.
Yeah.
And obviously, they were seeing that, it's a bit difficult.
Yeah.
But still.
Right. Yeah. That's not the way it was supposed to work.
No,
and whether that's
a little taste of my mouth
right.
about the whole situation.
Right.
And I don't know, her husband or two sons died. I don't know if that was
right. Yeah. I don't either.
Their decision to do something. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, like in the book of Judges, we're not always given this was a bad decision or whatever. It's just told us fact, and then we kind of see the consequences of it. All right. Okay, we will finish up the book of Ruth next time, which will also finish up our quarter. That'll be Wednesday night. Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.